Welcome to the Sustainable Clinical Medicine Podcast. I am your host, Sarah Smith. I am a practicing rural family physician and the charting coach. This is the podcast for physicians and advanced practice providers who are ready to step back from the busyness of their clinical day to share ideas, question everything, and redesign their clinical day. We are redesigning clinical medicine to create sustainable clinical days and create time for our lives outside of medicine. Join us for discussions with world experts who are helping design sustainable models of clinical medicine and the physicians or clinicians who have discovered or designed sustainable models of clinical medicine for themselves. Welcome back, everybody. We're here with Diane Shannon, who's going to be talking with us about things she's learned about burnout and wellness in the last 20 plus years. Thank you, Diane. Welcome. You can introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. So I'm in the Boston area, and I trained here in internal medicine, practiced in primary care for a few years, and then had a number of career transitions, including becoming a writer, an author, and now a coach. And my focus really has been, how do we address physician burnout?
Got it. Okay. So tell us about this journey in medicine. What happened to you?
Yes. Well, I loved patient care. I really loved primary care and the relationships that it's possible to develop. It felt like a privilege. I burned out, though, in residency. Maybe it was because this was before there were any restrictions on duty hours when I trained. Maybe I would have burned out anyway. But I pushed myself. I said, no, I am going to finish. I pushed myself each year to complete and then to take my internal medicine boards and to practice. But when I looked ahead after 3 years in practice, I thought, I don't know how not to burn out again. And I didn't have children. I wasn't married. I didn't own a home at that point. And I thought, I add anything to this mix and I am going to burn out again. And so back then, there was no discussion or support or help around burnout or physicians who were in any sort of distress. I didn't see anyone else who appeared to have trouble as I was. And so I left. I decided to leave clinical practice. It was not an easy decision. But I went into writing and worked at a medical communications company for a couple of years, then decided to go freelance. And I was a freelance writer and editor for more than 20 years. And my focus was working for foundations that were looking to improve the healthcare system. And that was their mission. I learned so much about where the system kind of fracture lines are. And as part of that, I discovered that there's this thing called professional burnout. I had no idea. I started looking into the research and really studying as much as I could, started speaking about it. And that eventually led to writing a book with another physician where we interviewed dozens of experts in burnout, physicians who'd experienced it, researchers in health sciences. And that led to really a shift again in my career to saying, this is what I want to focus on, is really how do we address physician burnout? It led me to become certified as a coach because I saw that when individuals have the bandwidth, they can then engage in trying to fix the system problems. And when we are burned out and we are just trying to get through the day, we can't even give feedback on what the true problems are, let alone how to fix them. And so I offer one-on-one and group coaching, and as well, I'm speaking, I have a podcast. And my focus over the past number of years has really been around the challenges specific to women physicians because their burnout numbers are higher. And so really trying to dig into what are those causes and how can we help support women so that they stay in the profession and they thrive.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Tell me what burnout looked like for you personally. Let's start with maybe residency. What were you experiencing that you were pushing through to keep going? What did that look like?
Oh, gosh, total low energy. And not just because of that feeling of like, oh, I've been on call and I'm tired. It really was just a total cumulative drain. The other thing that I noticed thinking back is I really had I had cognitive effects, whereas I would be able to tell you the drug lists of all of my patients on an inpatient rotation, but I
Hmm.
couldn't remember my zip code, or I couldn't remember my mother's birthday. So it's almost like my brain could only hold so much, and a lot of important stuff was getting pushed out. The other thing is that I felt like in order to continue to stay in the system, to practice, or at least to train and complete each year, I kind of shed pieces of myself as I went along. So I gave up exercise. I gave up reading for pleasure, gave up hobbies. An important relationship that had been a 5-year relationship ended,
Hmm.
so there were pieces of myself that I just kept saying, well, I can't keep this and keep going, so I'll let it go. And so I really felt like burnout for me was, oh, God, I became a shell of myself.
Hmm. Within the working hours, were you able to contain work to that, or was work also coming home with you? Or were you staying longer than the shift required? What was else was happening on the work?
Um, I would say maybe a little bit longer, in that, I have that perfectionistic streak and I wanted to make sure that my patients were okay. This was in training.
Hmm.
In practice, well, one of the benefits was this was before electronic health records. So you
Hmm.
couldn't do anything once you left. But what I'll say is I worried a lot, and I had a very quick startle reflex. And so I would, wake up and I would just bolt out of bed because I was so anxious and fearful. One of the big drivers for me was fear about patient safety issues. So
Hmm.
I was training and working before there was this recognition of patient safety and the IOM report, which came out in 2001. And so I saw how broken the system was, that it really was not set up to protect patients from our very human mistakes that we make. And I was worried about that. And so I
Hmm.
think that that worry stayed with me all the time. And I think that was a big part of it.
Okay. Um, Inside residency, did you have any support? You said it wasn't really recognized burnout, but was there discussion with other colleagues? Was there supervisors who were noticing how fatigued you were, or that level of, like you said, losing parts of you too?
Yeah. Um, well, I will say there was one example of that. I did not so I did not have mentors who were really paying attention to how I was doing. It was more like, how was I doing clinically? And I was doing fine.
Yeah.
But during the middle of my internship, the chair of the Department of Medicine called me into his office, and he was this older guy who was like really tall and had been there forever, and everyone was terrified of him. And he called me in and he said, I hear you're not doing well. And I sat there and I just burst into tears, which was not done. Like, that was, I was
Uh,
mortified. And so I said, he had heard about the relationship breakup, and he was
mhm.
kind of checking on that. And I said, no, I'm really fine. And I kind of walked out, and then just, again, put on the mask. I'm fine. I'm going to be able to do this. So even though I don't know that he was reaching out to offer help or just reaching out to make sure he wasn't going to lose an intern, but
Mhm.
I took it as, I better buck up. I better work even harder so that nobody can
Mhm.
notice that there's anything wrong.
Wow. Okay. So that's quite interesting, because when he says, I hear you're not doing well, I'm thinking you're thinking that's from a clinical perspective, and you're like horrified that he's saying something like that to you.
No, I was doing fine clinically. Like, I was
Okay.
getting great evaluations, patients
But
liked me, that my colleagues liked me. It was all like on the outside of medicine,
yeah.
how I was
Okay.
doing. Yeah.
Okay. So you understood him to say that in the context of, outside of here, you're not doing well.
Yeah.
Okay. And you took it to mean work harder, show less at work.
Yes.
crazy, isn't it? Isn't it interesting how we interpret these suggestions towards, hey, could you look after yourself too?
Right, right.
Got it. Okay, move into practice now. So you're in your first 3 years of working. What isn't going well that you're experiencing burnout? What's going on?
Right. And I would say that the burnout was milder, much milder
Mm,
than when I was in residency. My
okay.
concern was I couldn't see how I wouldn't prevent it in the future. I and so for me, it was a lot about the worry, the anxiety I was feeling, that startle, like I wasn't sleeping well. Um,
Mm-hmm.
really, like my partner at the time was saying, you're really very wound up, um, and um, and actually encouraged me to think about some other things just because I was unhappy and stressed out.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah.
Tell me about day-to-day work, getting up and going to work, being there in that daily grind of work. What is happening for you in that period of time?
Mostly I was thinking about is is this setting the problem? Maybe if I try a different setting. So I
Mm-hmm.
actually moved during that period of 3.5 years to different locations, different settings. I worked in college health at 3 different universities around Boston. I worked in some other settings. I would moonlight in urgent care setting. So just trying to say, maybe it's the setting. Maybe that's why I'm not happy and feeling energized by this. Even though I loved the patient care, there was something else that was really weighing me down. And each time I made one of those kind of, well, maybe this one will help, it didn't make a difference. It wasn't really getting me to a life that I could see being happy in the long term.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Okay. So now that you've had that experience, you made this really difficult decision that I need to leave medicine. Tell me how that kind of transpired.
Well, gosh, it wasn't an overnight decision. It really took years of, like I said, trying this out, trying that out. And eventually I just thought, well, let me see what this is like. And I was lucky enough to see an ad in the back of a medical journal for this position at this communication company. And so I went and interviewed, I got the position, and I kept my license. I actually kept my license active for 15 years after that, thinking I might go back. And I just kind of fell into the work there. There was this period of time where I realized when I made that transition from clinician to writer at this communications company, a huge change in my identity. And I had no idea how invested I was with what it meant to be a physician. And so, for instance, I would introduce myself in a social situation. And when before I'd said, oh, I'm a physician, I'm an internist. And all of a sudden everyone's, oh my gosh, where do you work? And you look so young. And what do all of this, what kind of experience have you had? And then when I'd introduce myself later as a writer, there was not that response. And
Mm-hmm.
and it just took me back, like, oh my gosh, I have made this big change and I'm not getting that response that I'm used to. So that was a part of it. I really had to work through the identity part of it. And at the same time, I was getting to bring back into my world parts of myself that I had chosen to let go of. So the hobbies, the exercise, the relationships, and my life was a lot more balanced. um, Looking back now, I could say if I had had mentoring, coaching, some sort of support at that period of time where I was really feeling the stress of patient patient safety concerns, right? Today, it might, if I were practicing when there had been electronic health records, it would have been that. But this is what it was. If I'd had some kind of support or some kind of guidance or roadmap, I think I would have had more options to choose to stay. But I
Mm-hmm.
really, at that point, I feel like I made the decision I needed to make to keep my sanity and my health. I wish I'd had other options. And that's part of the reason I do the work I do, is I do believe there are more options than just the two that I saw at that point.
Mhm. Can you flesh out for us that patient safety piece, the thing that you could not put down that you'd worry about constantly? Give me an example of what you mean by the patient safety was what was, highest on your alert system.
Right. So things like being aware that if a lab result came back, there wasn't a system to make sure that it was seen and addressed, and whatever needed to happen happened. Now, again, this is before electronic health records, but there was so much that fell through the cracks, or could fall through the cracks. There were workarounds, we all figured them out, but having to think of the workaround and do the workaround every time to prevent something from happening is stressful, because then the onus is on the individual. And I think one of the benefits of the IOM report was saying, no, this is not about the individual. This is about the system needing to set up processes that are safe, because like using human factor design to make sure that these things can't happen. And so then it's not all on the individual. So I feel like it was that weight of, oh my gosh, I could make a mistake and it will get through the cracks and harm a patient.
Got it. Okay. Because even though there's electronic medical records, we still see physicians and clinicians having to do workarounds to ensure that that CT is repeated in a year. Because if they don't put it on their work list in 10 months' time, no one else will remember, and asking the patient to remember isn't going to work. So if we want to create a safety net, we're still seeing workarounds, even now, even in this electronic health record and age. So I can kind of understand that anxiety and frustration and burden that you are placing on yourself within this system. And even now, 20 years later, we're still seeing that system level, even in primary care, needing to continually work at who else can help me? How else can I get this off my plate in a way that's better than me? Remembering,
Yes.
if I fall off the planet, if I win lotto and go live in Mexico, whatever it looks like, my patients will be fine because they have safety nets.
Yes. Yes. And that's exactly it. That's what I was sensing, is the lack of a safety net. And that is so stressful for individuals.
It can be. It can be one of the things that really creates that overdriving urgency, alert, startle that you were having. I'm curious about the partner that you were with at the time, and he said they said you're very wound up. Now, how did you take that feedback about that personal reflection from them that you're wound up? Like that, that was kind of an interesting comment for them to say.
Yes, right. Yes. That was interesting. I took it as, what is the word? Criticism, but that it was true. I took it as, yes, and this is my fault. I should just stop being like this. What's wrong with me that I am so wound up and so had like a startle reflex and having, insomnia. And yeah, some of that's probably my personality, my chemistry, whatever. Some piece of it was the system that I was working in, and the fact that, like the things we've talked about, that it was a setup for me to be stressed out.
Yeah, yeah. So it's an interesting reflection that he says, or they say, you're wound up, and you're like, okay, I need to work better on that. I need to drop
Right.
that part of my personality. I need to stop being so wound up. So I need to look different on the home front and different on the work front. And of course, all of that is beyond your immediate control, because these
Right.
are learned systems, learned practice to keep patients safe, which is your ultimate ultimatum as a physician, is I must keep my patients safe. And you've driven that to the point of, I will never let that go.
Yes. Yes.
Right. That is like my highest priority. Of course, I'm going to be wound up if you're talking about patient care.
Yeah. Right.
Patient
And patient care in a system that is not set up to keep them safe.
Yes. Yeah, there we go. Okay. So now we kind of understand you in that turmoil, constantly wound spring, because you're trying to hold the fabric of your patients together, and can't let that go. You then move into writing and you're starting to work in that patient safety piece. So what are you looking at in terms of patient safety, or that medical writing piece? What did you learn that ended you up in the burnout book, which we want to
Yes,
learn about?
yes. Well, so I learned so much. I mean, it was such a great experience, and I feel like where I am now, I've taken everything I've done in all these different careers I've had, and it all comes to fruition together. One of the things I learned that was so helpful to know is that in the patient safety world, we think about an error or an ultimate result, negative result for a patient as being like Swiss cheese, meaning there are, if you picture a whole bunch of pieces of Swiss cheese and the patient's on one side and there's an error here, one error should be caught. But when there's an error here and then there's another hole here and another hole here and another hole here, then it can affect the patient. But if we have set up systems where that first error is caught by the next system, the next level, then it doesn't affect the patient. And then we can look at that and say, okay, how can we do this differently? And it really is taking this approach that this is a system. It is not an individual's responsibility to prevent that. I mean, there are instances where, you have a grave mistake that's made on purpose. That's a whole other thing. We're talking about humans who sometimes make mistakes, and the system should be set up to protect the patient from that with all of these various processes. But when they all have holes in them and then the holes line up, then you're going to have a problem. So that's one of the things that I learned. And then I started, like I said, I was actually writing an article that was on the connection between patient experience, not the patient experience scores, but the actual experience of patients and physician well-being and burnout. And in writing that, I learned that there is this thing called physician or professional burnout. And I read the definition. I was like, oh my gosh, there's a name for what happened to me. I had no idea. Until that point, I thought it was I couldn't hack it. I wasn't strong enough. I didn't have what it took. And I had really had a lot of shame that I was carrying for the longest time. And then to see that there's this thing called professional burnout, and there's research behind it, there's a definition, there's components, and that really it is, as they defined it in the 70s, it is a reflection of excessive stress in the workplace. So it's not about individual susceptibility. And that is what led me to, I actually began, once I started finding this, pulling together whatever research I could find in a PowerPoint, just because it was easier for me to put it all in one place. And then I was working at a coffee shop, and the line waiting to order was behind me, so they could see my screen. And a woman came up to me and said, "Are you writing about physician burnout?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "I'm a physician and I burned out. Can I talk to you?" And that was the beginning of me interviewing and then sharing my story, and then physicians contacting me to say, I didn't know anyone else felt this way. I thought I was the only one. Now, this was back in 2011, before there was very much written. And that is what really motivated me, is just hearing their stories, and so many of us with the same experience.
Yeah. Tell me about the book and the co-authors. What's the book called, and what were the things that you found in there that are useful for us in terms of knowing about burnout?
Yes. So my co-author is Dr. Paul Duchamp, and we were introduced. We were both working for a consulting company. I was doing a writing project, and he was a consultant. He is a family physician who then had leadership roles. And so we were introduced because both of us wanted to write a book about burnout for physicians. And we spent 15 months working on the book, interviewing lots of folks, and we heard over and over and over again, burnout is a system problem. And so the book really focuses on what are those system problems and what do we do about them. And it includes 12 case studies of organizations that had done something right to address some of those system problems. We also briefly mentioned some of the individual factors and individual solutions, and then some that are external to organizations that come from regulatory or patient demographic changes that put more pressure on the organization, which gets transmitted into the stress on the patient or on the physician. So we cover all of it, but the bulk of it is really laying out the case that this is a system issue and it requires organizations and leadership and culture change to really address some of the processes that are really the cause of so many frustrations that lead to burnout.
Got it. And then you discovered that by increasing helping at the individual level can assist, but you needed to create capacity for considering changes. So tell me more about the individual level that you learned.
Yes, absolutely. And so this is one of those serendipitous things that happened where a colleague said, "Oh, you're interested in burnout. You should talk to a physician I know. He started a program. He had burned out, worked with an executive coach for 6 months, had such a huge turnaround that he began a program." And I interviewed him and I said, "Oh, tell me more about your program." And he said, "Well, we work with physicians on their part of it, on their responsibility as individuals." And I said, "Wait a second, hold on. This burnout is a systems issue. Aren't you having a revolt every time you work with individuals on this?" And he said, "No, because they need to build the bandwidth in order to help the system." And so what they found is once they had run through their organization, a certain number of physicians had gone through this group coaching program that they created, it changed the culture of the organization. And more of them had the energy and the wherewithal to join together to create an EHR optimization team, for example, that began to make improvements there. So that I spoke with him and I said, "Oh, I'd really like to come see your program." And he said, "You can't come observe, you have to do it." And so I went down there and did this program. And I was so inspired when I left that I said, "I'm going to become a coach," because now I can see how I could help impact the system by helping individuals.
Got it. So let's take you back to where you were in your first 3 years of practice. What would have been different had you had that experience? We're only going to hypothesize, but what do you think it would have looked like, you in that constant alert level to you post training or understanding some of those tools you'd learned from an individual level?
Great question.
That transition. Yeah.
Yeah. So what a great question. Like, imagine back, what would it have been
That's
like?
right.
Right.
That's right. Yeah.
I think one is I would have started with looking at myself. Where are the places I am getting in my own way? So, for instance, perfectionism, people pleasing, not setting limits, not prioritizing self-care, because I had bought into the message that I'm a robot and I can go without sleep, without eating, without exercise. Like, I bought into that and I kept living that way. So where are the things that I needed to really face up and do differently, and then learn. I would have needed to learn how to set boundaries, to say, "No, I'm not doing that," or "I'm not doing that extra," or "This works for me, but that doesn't." Instead of worrying about what other people thought, so that I didn't stand up for myself or didn't create a work environment or a work schedule that worked for me. So I think that's a piece of it. And then I think I would have advocated for the changes that I saw more. I would have used my voice, I think, joined with other physicians more. And then the third thing is, I think I would have had a sense of camaraderie. I felt so alone back then. because I didn't know anyone else who was experiencing burnout. When I looked around in residency, I mean, people were tired, but there was no one who looked like they were having trouble, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so even in practice, it felt like all of my, my colleagues from residency, they were all out practicing and everybody sounded like they were doing okay. I felt so alone, and there
Mm-hmm.
wasn't anything written about burnout. Whereas I think if I had met, like in these group coaching experiences,
Mm-hmm.
other physicians who were experiencing some of the same things, I would have felt less alone. And as we were gaining skills and confidence in building workplaces that would work for us, I think I would have felt that camaraderie and had that support. So those are some of the things I think would have been different.
Got it. Yeah. And then from a systems level, what are organizations encouraged to do to try to help offset this burnout while also looking at that patient safety perspective? What are some of the organizations that you've seen do things well? Or what are the things that they're doing well?
Yes. Well, let me see. So much has changed in the past 5 or 6 years, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So much
Yeah.
has changed. And one of the things that I have seen from the clients that I work with is how much more pressure there is to be productive and to go
Mm-hmm.
faster, spend less time with patients, hurry up, get through, you've got targets to reach, which I don't think was as true before. So I think
Mm-hmm.
that's a piece of it. Um, Sorry, I just lost my train of thought.
That's
Can you
okay.
remind me of the question?
That's definitely some of the pressure coming down from the organization is on that productivity for sure. We're seeing physicians having to meet targets in terms of numbers seen or types of patients seen to hit those productivity numbers for sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Was
That's
there
one of the things that organizations are not doing well though.
Yeah, you're right. Okay. So organizations that are doing something right. What I would say is a big piece is leadership. So
Okay.
leadership training. So
Yeah.
often individuals are promoted into leadership because of their clinical skills or their research, but they don't have the training they need to really lead people. So that's a
Mm-hmm.
big piece of it. And there's research now that shows that the leadership behaviors have a direct effect on the well-being of physicians. And some of those behaviors are about asking, how are you doing? What are
Mm-hmm.
your professional goals? And having regular reviews to ask those questions and
Mm-hmm.
really be present. And so another piece of it is leaders who are not often off in an office somewhere, but are actually physically around so that you can see them, so they can ask, how are you doing? What do you need? What would help you? What obstacles are you facing that I might help you with? And then to
Mm-hmm.
really begin to see some of that change. So more communication both ways, and then really taking those steps to remove some of those obstacles that are in the way. And what often happens is the people at the decision-making level don't know what those obstacles are.
Mm-hmm.
They get stuck somewhere in the middle, right? You may communicate it to your immediate supervisor, but that person may not ever get it up to the person who could make that change. And
Yeah.
often it's that communication. Once that person knows, it may be a simple policy change, and all of a sudden there's one less task or frustration for you. So those, I think, are really important pieces. The other, and this is a bigger issue, is how we pay for healthcare in the United States, big
Mm-hmm.
issue,
Mm-hmm.
and how physicians are paid and compensated. And some of the shift over to productivity-based payment or compensation for physicians, I think, puts an additional strain on, especially, and this is a piece that I recently worked on a piece on PTO, and the fact that physicians don't really get paid time off. Um, so if you are paid on a productivity basis that is targeting 52 weeks, or the numbers are based on 52 weeks, there is a disincentive to take any time off. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
if they just changed that and made it for 46 weeks, and that was the denominator, right? That would reduce some of that disincentive to take time off. And obviously, organizations on first glance, if they're just thinking about this quarter, they don't want to do that because that will make their numbers look worse in this quarter. But if they want to retain physicians and not have to pay the $1 million to replace one, then they will invest in things like this.
Yeah. Other ones I see that could be improved. The patient satisfaction scores being linked to bonuses, and then income being withheld based on the experience of another human's experience, which is really just that not understanding how physicians and clinicians work at the coalface when you're putting those type of decisions within an organization, for instance. It's just that recognition. I like what you said, that if leadership knows what's happening, or you feel seen, heard, listened to, respected, and then there is change available from your feedback. I think if we're giving feedback and nothing changes, that's a disincentive to want to give feedback, like you said.
Absolutely, right.
Because if your leaders are coming and looking and seeing what actually happens on a day-to-day, they understand me, they know me, and they know why I'm asking for this. That's going to be a hugely impactful leadership versus someone you've never met, who isn't around, who doesn't know.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. Good. What is the name of the book that you wrote about burnout in the systems?
Yes. It is called Preventing Physician Burnout, Curing the Chaos and Returning Joy to the Practice of Medicine. And it's available on Amazon and also on my website.
Perfect. And where can people find you if they're interested in reaching out, learning more, listening to your podcast?
Absolutely. So all of that is on my website, which is dianeshannon.com, or people can email me at diane@dianeshannon.com.
Perfect. Great. And is there anything that we didn't talk about that you'd like to leave listeners with today?
Yes, I think one of the things I've discovered in working with individuals is the power of micro changes. So I have been surprised over and over again by how when physicians make a number of small changes, it has a huge impact on their work experience, their life experience. And honestly, both of us end up being surprised. And so that is the thing I want to share is when you're in burnout, it feels like you're just overwhelmed. There's nothing you can do. You're just trying to get through the day. But often it's a series of very small changes that will take you from that place to a better place.
Love it. There you go. Thank you so much for this conversation. Hopefully we can learn something about ourselves and our systems within burnout. I appreciate you today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, no worries. Bye. Thank you for being part of the Sustainable Clinical Medicine podcast. If you'd like to learn more or join us to help you get home with today's work done, go to chartingcoach.ca. There you'll find all the information on the premier Lifetime Access Charting Champions program that is helping physicians get home with today's work done, with all the proven tools, support, and community you need to create time for your life outside of medicine. We would love to see you there. Until next time, thanks for listening.